recent job, the senior director role, or is there another one?
No, this is the most recent. The only thing that's happened recently is that a team was shifted under me. So before, the role was mostly individual contributor. I had one or two guys usually. There's a team called the Advanced Media Engineering team, and that was basically realigned with my very small team that I used to have. So for the first bullet in the first section, essentially that becomes, that's part of now the Advanced Media Engineering team. So I'm leading that team, doing all those things in that first bullet.
All right. Okay. So can you give me like an overview of your key responsibilities?
The previous one?
For the senior director role, yeah.
Oh, for this, okay. Give me just 1 second. Let me pull up my resume. So just overall, let me give you overview. So basically, at NBC, there's a group. There's a larger team called Operations and Technology. Under Operations and Technology, there's an engineering team. I'm on that engineering team, focused on streaming video. So the engineering team also handles broadcast. It also handles things like building control rooms and studios, and the network and everything else. My little portion was focused on how do we get our content online. And that includes, everything from mobile devices to set-top box distribution, etc. The individual pieces in that role were accounted for by selecting encoding vendors. Well, actually, let me take it even a step higher level than that. It was basically determining technologies that will help us enable that streaming technology stack that we have. Whether it's encoding or packaging or security or any part of the distribution aspect of that content. So it included like business development, finding new vendors, determining where the consumer trends are so that we know where to invest where to make the investments in our streaming platform. Like if nobody's watching on desktop anymore and everyone's watching on OTT devices, it's moving that technology spend to better focus on over the top, like Roku, Apple TV, Google Chromecast, right? Those sort of devices. And what that means potentially is different modes of security. It means different encoding profiles. So on your mobile phone, the quality that we're delivering is good enough for your phone, but it's not good enough for a big TV, right? So how do we move our investments to focus more on better, more efficient encoding on your TV? How do we enable faster streaming? Not faster in the terms of like fast internet, but you click on a video and it immediately comes up. I'm sure you have Netflix, right? Or you've seen Netflix or whatever. But you hit a button and it comes up in 1 or 2 seconds. 3 or 4 seconds, people start leaving. Doing that analysis and then figuring out what technology we need to put in place to enable that was essentially the role that I had since 2015, 2016. Before that, between 2012 and 2015-ish, basically what we were doing was putting all of our linear content, linear means all of our live streams, online under the TV Everywhere umbrella. TV Everywhere is a general industry term. Maybe you've come across it, but it essentially means all of our content streamed online. As long as you're a customer of a cable company or some other business arrangement we had, you can watch our streams. So that basically meant taking all of our channels that we have on TV, which was all of our local stations, as well as all of our cable networks, those things like CNBC, MSNBC, etc., and moving it um, uh, for streaming.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my primary responsibility. So from 2012 to about 15, we were building all that out, launching all of our channels. We had something like at the end of the day, we probably had about 100 streams by the end of 2013-ish, 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And that included everything from our local stations to our cable networks, all of our sports networks as well. And then working with our player teams to enable playback on those devices. So everything from a phone to Apple TV to your desktop.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So basically before 2015, you were more focused on live streaming, and then after that,
Yeah,
it's getting your content online, right?
live or and VOD, yeah, both.
All
So
right.
since 2015, it's based. So the 2012-2015 was a very tactical role, if you will. We had to launch this
Mm-hmm.
for the company. It was the first time we were doing this. TV Everywhere was a new initiative in the industry. This is what we were doing, and it was basically
Mm-hmm.
me and maybe 2 or 3 other people.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a big effort because our company, was still very invested in traditional TV. So still on the engineering team, but the engineering team was focused on getting our signal out on TV, the normal old-fashioned way. So this was
Mm-hmm.
kind of a side project that they funded, and we went and did it. Not a big deal, right? Since 2015, the role shifted to become more. It went from whatever that team was called to advanced technology and strategy. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, in advanced technology and strategy, that basically meant how do we now take the next step? What are the technologies we should be looking at? What are the partners and suppliers we should be working with? What are the consumer trends shifting to, right? So it wasn't R&D necessarily, but it was kind of like R&D. It was more, developing new technology frameworks to fit our streaming applications. Those streaming applications that we built in 2012, 2015 were kind of now mainstream. They went
Mm-hmm.
to larger teams to operate and maintain and upgrade and everything else. Those guys were doing it. We didn't really run it at that point. We just
Mm-hmm.
launched it, turned over the keys, then the rest of the teams started to run it and build upon it. What we then focused on is how to improve it.
All
And
right.
then now, most recently, I've kind of gone back a little bit. Actually, it's more of a mixed role. It's both how do we advance our streaming platform, but then this team also is responsible for how we originate all of that content, right? So everything from encoding to transport to delivery, all of those aspects kind of that I have in that first bullet is what we're focused on now. So it's again it's operational, it's
Mm-hmm.
engineering, it's new product development, new technology introduction. That's all kind of now wrapped up into this smaller team that I have.
All right. Perfect. So, I have a couple of questions for this. Firstly, when you talk about these new products that you've developed and this framework, architecture, and everything, can you break that up into projects for me and talk about that?
Different projects.
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of what I was describing. So the first in 2012 in this most recent role, again, the first project was launching these TV Everywhere streams.
Mm-hmm.
That was essentially getting all of our content online, all of
Okay.
our live content online. The that's again, there's a lot of aspects to it, right? It's everything from encode to entitlement platforms to player stack,
Mm-hmm.
transporting those streams, CDN distribution. That's all encompassed in that project. Again, it's a multi-year project, required a lot of different types of funding. And then because we have so many networks and stations, it took a while to get all that um, in the market.
All right.
The subsequent to that, in the more R&D or in the technology strategy role, basically the major projects included DRM. So how do
Okay.
we implement DRM across all of those streams and all of our players? And we have many different players, again, everything from Apple TV, Roku. So we probably have about a dozen different experiences on which we needed to secure our content. So determining the DRM strategy, the approach, the investment, which direction, and that was part of the approach, right? Do we take a multi-DRM strategy? Do we do native DRM? Whatever. Those aspects we had to determine. There were projects on updating the encoding profile stack. So how do we take what we did in 2012 and advance that so that you can get faster startup time, low buffering, better performance of your video streaming? So that was all part of this as well.
Okay.
What else? There was a push, which we are now completely on board with, is how do we migrate all of our encoding to the cloud? So there's been a big push over the last 2-3 years on how we take everything that we've built out in our facilities, whether it's in New York or Denver or California, and move it into a cloud environment. And that basically means we source once from our premise and push that into the cloud. And then have the cloud then do all the encoding, packaging, security, distribution, hosting. That's all cloud driven. And we're in the process now of moving all of that. Again, this has been going on for a couple of years, but I think finally we're in a position where we can start really leveraging cloud technology to service our content and our streams.
All right. So these are your 4 major projects that you've done, right?
Yeah. I think if we center them around that way. One other big project actually in 2012 that consumed a lot of my time, and I have it in my second bullet, it's basically the advertising strategy. How do we insert ads into our content in the cloud, essentially? Before we were doing it all at the player. So as you're playing back content on your Apple TV, for example, when it hits the ad break, and that's a break we put in, the device would make a call to our ad servers and then play back the ads locally. We shifted that completely. We were one of the first implementations of what's called server-side ad insertion. And essentially that means all that decisioning, all that calls are done in the cloud. And what the player gets, what the Apple TV gets, it's just a regular video stream. It doesn't know it's playing an ad from regular content, if that makes sense.
All right.
So that was a big implementation. Again, it was one of the first in the industry. And we applied this to all of our linear streams. So everything that was played back live was server-side ad inserted.
All right, perfect. So I want to talk about these projects one by one. There's some questions that I need to ask. So for the TV Everywhere stream project that you talked about,
yes,
what was the size of the team that you were working with?
Again, it wasn't big because it was being treated as like a side project. The company wasn't paying a lot of attention to it. So it was me essentially doing all the architecture, the vendor diligence, the implementation with the vendor. We were very dependent on our third-party vendor. The larger team that was working on this, maybe 1, 2, you can count it on one hand. It was maybe 4 or 5 people.
All right. Okay. And for this project, what were the challenges that you faced?
It was essentially everything was basically new at that point, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
technology wasn't fully there for us to do things like signaling for these
Mm-hmm.
live streams so that the ad plays back at the right time, not 2 seconds late, not 1 second late, not over the content, right? When the ad is supposed to play, it's supposed to play. That was, I think, one of our largest um, challenges is how do we synchronize all of these aspects of playing back a stream into the live stream.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the distribution aspect also was a challenge. So we have these streams not only playing out on our own apps, so our NBC apps, whether it's NBC, Sci-Fi, USA, Bravo, but it's also third-party distribution partners. So the cable
Mm-hmm.
companies or like the Hulus of the world, how do we get our content into those platforms that we really have no control over? It's somebody else's platform, but they've asked for our streams, and we've had this business relationship for them to consume our streams. That's what we that was kind of a challenge for us as well.
All right. So for both of these challenges, the synchronicity and the distribution aspect challenge, how were you able to overcome these?
It was very close collaboration with our technology partners, right? So we were working
Mm-hmm.
with a couple of like Adobe and Envato, which is now Google. Really, it was a collaborative effort to figure out how we determine how we overcome these challenges. A lot of them was new development. It just didn't exist. So it was working with those vendors to develop the technology to support this distribution. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's nothing more than that, right? And you'll see it in the previous roles before this, especially with the Olympics. It was basically new technology that we're developing and implementing, and that's kind of been a theme at NBC so far over the last 15 years. It's stepping into areas where you're not consuming off-the-shelf applications and software, and actually developing new software, developing new methods of how you enable playback or video consumption on these new emerging platforms. That's another big challenge. Is every few months there's a new update or there's a new device that comes out, and you need to make your
Mm-hmm.
streams fit into that new update or that new device. And that again is not in our control. Apple or Google or Roku will come out with an update or a new device, and now we're figuring out a way to fit our video into that device. Amazon came up with the Alexa Show. CNBC wanted their news clips to show up on that video screen, which is a tiny little video screen that sits on somebody's countertop. How do you
Mm-hmm.
make that happen, right? It's you can't just take our stream and say, here, go play it. They require different conditioning and different aspects of that stream that aren't readily available. So just the change that's required to
Mm-hmm.
adapt playback of these streams on those devices has been a challenge. And and
Okay.
and keeping abreast of those emerging technologies, of those emerging standards, and
Mm-hmm.
continuing to re-architect the the way you stream video has it's always changing,
All
and there's
right.
always new challenges.
So is there some way that you prepare for this, for some new device or new technology that's coming up? Is there something you do to be prepared in advance?
No, I mean, not really. We don't know until it's actually released, right? Because Apple,
Mm-hmm.
Amazon, Google, they don't tell us necessarily that, hey, we're launching this device and you guys need to play back streams in this way.
Mm-hmm.
When there is some advance notice, but that's generally available, right? You can Google it, and Apple will release some information on what that device is supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
We will start to do the diligence on our side to determine how we plug in to that device based on those parameters that they're giving us. But until it's in the market and until we get our hands on that device, there isn't really much we can do. Once we get it, then we understand from its code base and its capabilities, how we fit our streams into that device. But no, it's a good question, but it's not something that we have a lot of advanced notice with.
All right.
So it's a pretty much
All
a
right.
rush, right? Because the first program, everyone, soon as the device comes out, everyone wants to get onto that device, right? And you don't want to be
Yeah.
the only company out there who can't play back on that device. So yeah, it's challenging, and out the door it doesn't work immediately. There are bugs in it, and it takes a few iterations before that thing stabilizes.
All right. Okay. So you also mentioned this DRM project.